Great. And then online, I see Andrew Rupke with UGS, Carla Beadle with Westminster University, Danielle Aziz with Water Resources, Elliot Jagniecki with UGS, Layla Mahdi with Water Resources, Rod Dubuque with Friends. Is there anybody else online? Can't see.
Ryan
Ryan. Thanks, Ryan.
Sorry.
I can see you. Great. Well, thanks. On the, I guess on our agenda here that you can see on the screen, we'll have our typical update on lake conditions from Ryan and Christine. One of the things that we want to really talk about is follow up on our conversation from our last meeting in October regarding the salinity approximation for this coming year, and then talk about the berm modifications. I guess on this, I did not include in here one thing we had also talked about last month. We talked about raising the berm again this winter, but we also talked about lowering it this winter in the short term. So that's something that we'll want to include here. I think as I was thinking about this meeting after I sent the agenda out, I think the South Arm mixing issues very much tied in with berm modification. So we'll probably bump that up to talk about that along with the berm modifications. I want to make sure we have time to talk about the mineral extraction impact on salinity study, and talk about what questions that study should evaluate. And then I know Craig Miller had submitted a salinity converter widget. Actually, I think he submitted that like over a year ago initially. And what they would like to do, what Water Resources would like to do, is post that as a tool that other people can use, but they want to make sure that the salinity committee's good with it. So I wanted to talk about that. I think any other changes or anything else anybody would like to make sure we talk about today? All right. I sent out the summary of our October 26th meeting for the committee's review. Any questions or comments on that? If not, entertain a motion to approve that. Thanks, Joe.
I wasn't here, but I'll second.
All right. All right. All those in favor of approving?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any opposed? All right. Approved unanimously. Thank you. All right. Were you able? Sorry, Ethan. Were you able to? Are you still trying to patch in?
Yes. Apologies.
No worries. While we do that, let's, I guess, jump to the salinity converter widget. Did anybody have a chance to, any comments on that? Had a chance to review that?
My simple mind really enjoys using it, so as long as the folks that are in the know agree, I think it's great. I think Water Resources should that's
I can chime in for USGS as well. Christine has reviewed it, and Bill Johnson, if he's online, he's taking a look at it as well. And sorry, Bill, to please jump in, but we think that the approach is correct.
Okay. Are the units, I guess with the words that are on there, are the units all, I know I was looking at our SOP for density and salinity, and there we had used units of grams per cubic centimeter, but is the kilograms per liter appropriate? Or we have, approve it, I want to make sure that we're all,
It could be a point of confusion for the public to see liter rather than cubic centimeter.
good point. And then I guess the only other question, Elliot says he agrees. You agree with the grams per cubic centimeter, or Elliot? I don't know if you can talk.
I think grams per cubic centimeter is more conventional that people can grasp. I could be wrong.
It probably would be nice if it lined up with the SOP.
I pulled this up and we just talked about the density in terms of grams per cubic centimeter, and then the salinity in terms of grams per liter in the SOP.
I mean, it's the same thing.
Right.
I mean, it's a metric system.
Yeah.
I mean, are you asking whether grams per centimeter versus grams per liter would confuse others?
Yeah. Well, I'm just in terms of what gets published online for people to use.
I think it's already confusing enough that they're like to the public and others that percentages and grams per liter don't have this direct equation. And we've used grams per liter so much in the past that if it's the same to everybody, I think grams per liter has been the more common reference, like in used articles and other publications. I think it would make sense to keep grams per liter.
But then I think they're talking about density rather than brine mass concentration.
Okay,
Yeah, we're talking about density.
gotcha, good.
I mean, honestly, use kg per liter. Grams per cubic centimeter. I mean, you could use kg per cubic decimeter, I guess.
Well, I don't know that people are gonna dive into that. I was just thinking if they see grams per liter and then they see kilograms per liter,
That's a
Um,
good point, yeah.
you know,
It's a little confusing, yeah.
is, there's 1,000 grams in a kilogram. So why is it a different number?
And I know for our output on the Anton Par densiometer, it's in grams per cubic centimeter. So that might be more direct for people who are measuring density.
Okay. Well, I'll ask if they can do that. And I think, and then I just wondered in terms of the public looking at this and they see brine mass concentration, if they're just looking for what is the salinity? Are they, that maybe we put salinity in parentheses behind it or something, just to make it crystal clear.
Yeah, I like
On that point, clarity for the public, I think there needs to be, I don't know, just like a one sentence asterisk, something that just shows that this does not work with refractometer data. Like you cannot take a refractometer percent and put that in there and get an accurate salinity, density, anything. Just an asterisk.
Good point. And reference SOP.
Yes, yes.
Bill.
Yeah, I just want to point out that not having played with this, it's not clear to me what is the input and what is the output on this screen. And if that could be better delineated, I think that would also help.
Okay. I think
What happens, Bill, is in the temperature input, if you change the Fahrenheit, then the Celsius temperature adjusts as well. And below that, if you change the brine mass concentration, then the density and the percentage adjusts. And if you change the brine density, then the mass concentration and the percentage adjusts. So they're linked. The temperatures are linked and the concentration / density / percentage is linked.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And so in other words, all of these can be adjusted. And And it's obvious when you start playing with them. So I think that's great. Actually, I apologize for not having played with this until I haven't played with this. So that's great. I agree. I do agree that grams per cubic centimeter for density is a better unit.
Okay. Well, I will ask Craig if we can make that change. I'll ask if they can add salinity in parentheses behind mass concentration. And then we'll put a note there with the percentage that this is not derived, that cannot be derived via the refractometer. And then have a reference and maybe even a link to the SOP. So people can easily access that.
I think you should add salinity to your brine mass percentage as well, or maybe even just percent salinity.
Okay.
One other suggestion I'd have is that to distinguish salinity from brine mass concentration, excuse me, distinguish brine mass concentration salinity from density, you could say grams of solute per liter of solution and grams of solution per centimeter cubed of solution.
I'm just thinking the general public is going to wonder what's a solute, what's the solution.
I know, even as I said it, I thought this is not helping at all.
I mean, you're absolutely right. That's what it is. I think, well, I guess any thoughts from the committee on some of these changes? And
Who's intended to use this? Who's the audience?
I think it was intended for, well, any of us can use it, but I think also we want, it's the public or people who are wondering. I guess the media, I think, has been generally a place where we've had confusion where people hear percent and they don't know how to translate back and forth. So that
For that group, I don't know if any of the changes we're talking about will make this intuitive to them. I mean, if it's for someone working on the lake with some familiarity, it'll work either way, but I mean, those different things, it's different measures that someone randomly coming off that's not familiar with it is probably going to struggle a little bit. So.
Where will it be linked from? Maybe that's the question to ask, is where will the link be?
what Craig had indicated that this would be on the Division of Water Resources website.
Well, that's probably the audience, and whoever's fishing that side.
I mean, could you add the equations that bring you from one to another? No.
Yeah, I know the equation of states there. I think just adding references in general is good.
Or references, yeah.
Is there some way in which, and maybe it's two different entities, but incorporating this into the Great Salt Lake Hydro Mapper? Because that would be something that the public is already aware of. And then the refinement of getting more specific about this part of the characteristic of the system would be beneficial, I think.
And match the units in the hydro map.
Yeah,
Good idea.
yeah.
So we think the big boats there.
Hey, have a cookie.
On that.
Good. Yeah, please have a cookie. They're really, really good and there's lots of them. Thanks, Lynn. So I guess I would entertain a motion to approve, having the division post this with those changes. And we'll see if and how we can link that to the hydro mapper. I think their intent is I think DNR has been developing a Great Salt Lake website. And so I think that's still being talked about, but I think getting it out there easy access is the goal.
And I'm sorry, where on the website for DWR, do you know where this would deliver?
Layla or email. Well, we can find out.
What was the question? Sorry.
you know what Greg's intention was as to what website this widget will be on?
Well, we have, I'm thinking maybe the Great Salt Lake website that we have.
That would be my suggestion too. I was thinking like it doesn't necessarily fit into the water resources page, but the Great Salt Lake hub that they have would be a great home for this.
Yeah,
Or-
I think that was the intention, putting the reference that these equations come from USGS.
Okay. All right, well, I guess entertain a motion to approve that to be amended or changed as we talked about and posted.
So
Thomas,
second.
thanks, Mark. Any discussion, any additional discussion? All those in favor? Motion approved. Okay, all those against? All right, hearing none, unanimously approved. Thank you. I think it'll be I mean, as you all know, there's been a lot of confusion in the discussion over when we talk about percentages versus what the actual concentration is. And the intent here is to hopefully at least provide a tool for people to easily compare things. So thank you. Are you ready? Okay. All right. So we'll jump back to the update on lake conditions. I can share.
Okay, great. So I will be giving an update and Ryan's going to chime in as needed and as he just wants to. So we'll be talking about our typical lake elevation, velocity and discharge at the breach. Well, actually, probably not velocity, and then inflow volumes, and then give a salinity update. So as of 2 days ago, Tuesday, our south arm elevation was 4192.3. Looks like we've kind of bottomed out and we're seeing a slight uptick now, very, very gradual. And relative to our high in June, we are still down 1.7 feet. For the north arm, we're sitting at 4189.3. Again, kind of gradual uptick, not very much, and we're down 0.5 foot since March. We still are holding at a 3 foot elevation difference between the north and the south arms. That's been pretty consistent for at least a month, if not more. And what's coming into the lake, we'll kind of go through that. So looking at Bear River near Corinne, this, I think you're all familiar with this plot, but we're looking at cumulative stream flow from the beginning of the water year, which starts on October 1st. And this greenish area highlights the 25th and 75th percentiles of historic discharge. This black line is where we're sitting at now. So we're near the median so far for Bear River near Corinne gauge. Weaver River at Plain City, we are near high, near the 75th percentile, or actually near the highest observed. So we'll see if that holds up. Farmington Bay outflow, we're near median for that gauge. So draining the bay and Jordan River. And Goggin Drain, we are at about the 75th percentile. So very early in the water year, but so far looking at like we're around median to 75th percentile of historic flow distributions. And then a quick plot of our new breach discharge measurements. So discharge is shown in a CFS on the y-axis. Our most recent measurement was on November 14th, and I believe it was around 650 CFS. And Andy also got a measurement at the beginning of November, which was around 800. Is that right, Ryan?
Yes. So the measurement on November 3rd was 817 CFS, and the measurement on November 14th was 695 CFS. And that's okay. And then so that drop, if you look at the elevation difference, the gray line, it's held relatively steady between the lake bodies, north and the south. But we do think at the berm, there's been just enough change in the south arm water surface elevation to where the flow is being mostly confined now to the at least when this measurement was made, to kind of the eroded out V notch, you know, here. And so that might be changing. That's why the blue dots from roughly mid July through current period, you know, they're not exactly lining up. This is kind of just related to the geometry, you know, the kind of unusual geometry of the berm. It's not a perfect broad crested weir. It's not a perfect V notch weir. So there's going to be a little bit of variation in that relationship.
Thanks, Ryan. Jumping to salinity. This is the plot we typically show. First, I'll start with the record back to 2010. So salinity on the y-axis in grams per liter, showing data from two sites, our 2565 in Carrington Bay and 3510 in Gilbert Bay. We don't see a deep brine layer right now. Shallow and deep salinities are very similar. We're still in kind of our optimal range. Our most recent measurements were around 144 grams per liter. Actually, sorry, 144 at 3510 and 140 at 2565. So these are relatively unchanged from last month. So we've kind of stabilized here as lake levels have stabilized. And we have other recent salinities kind of corroborating these open water measurements. At the New Breach, our last measurement was in mid-October. That was around 142 grams per liter. At Saltaire, 143. And then UGS got a measurement most recently on October 11th. That was 137 grams per liter. And I'll mention that the USGS GSLIP samples, our most recent measurements are from November 6th. So that's what this is all reference to. If we zoom in over the last couple of years and kind of see how things have stabilized, the spatial variability in salinity is kind of gone down. Certainly, our 2267 site, which is this blue triangle, is kind of more in line with the other samples, although still a little more dilute. But yeah, it looks like we are down about 41 grams per liter relative to last November at 3510 and down 46 grams per liter relative to our site at 2565 from last November. So quite a big change from last November. And our measurements at half a meter and 3 meters below the surface are pretty similar, maybe 1 gram per liter difference. So seeing pretty well mixed conditions in the south arm. And I'll stop there. That's kind of our update on conditions.
Thank you. Any other observations from anybody? Okay. Thank you. Did you have?
Can we keep going?
Yes, why don't you just keep on going?
Okay. Okay, so now we will dive into kind of the questions that were posed last time. So this is kind of where we left off, is Bill had asked me to kind of compute fluxes at the breach and how they would differ if we had used a south arm salinity rather than a Bear River. And we were kind of saying, okay, maybe there's a 10 to 30% difference in flux. Oops. Let me try again, sorry. Wait, okay, sorry about that. This is where we left off, and we were saying, okay, maybe there's a 10 to 30% difference in salt flux at the breach based on using different salinities for these discrete points in time where we had measurements. And so a couple of follow-up questions were, what if we look at cumulative flux? So kind of adding up all the fluxes over the runoff season. And then how does that actually affect south arm salinity? That was kind of the big take home. So the following slides have quite a few equations in them. I'm happy to glaze over those. If people are not interested in the math, I'm happy to just jump to the story, but I wanted to be transparent. So they're there if we want to get into them. First of all, okay, looking at cumulative salt load. So this is a little tricky because we don't have a continuous discharge record at the breach. But what I did is I just said, I took estimates from Utah State record. They have discharge estimates. Indy now has a discharge record after June based on the rating kind of developed with the berm conditions. And then some period of the discharge record I interpolated. That is all to say, there's an estimated discharge record used here. And then I applied salinities measured at the breach versus measured at 2565 and 3510. And so this is to kind of simulate what is the cumulative flux at the breach if there is a Bear River impact, that's what we observed, versus if there's minimal Bear River impact, which I'm saying is kind of like a 3510 condition. And these plots illustrate from early April through July, April 1st to July 28th. And it's a cumulative flux plot. So it's basically pretend we're standing at the breach, there's flow and load going by there in a given day. And I'm just adding up all those loads over time from day to day.
And the Bear River water displaces South Arm brine and that flux, or this floats on top, or what?
So the breach condition that I simulate here, this solid line, is what I'm simulating to be the Bear River impact. Because we know the Bear River, what we observed in reality was an impacted.
You're putting that lens on top of it.
Yes, it's kind of there. That's what we measured. And so the kind of hypothetical lines we're looking at are like, okay, what if we applied a 2565 salinity instead, or a 3510 salinity instead? So there are differences. And the estimated total cumulative flux difference over that period of time is about 7-8% if we were to use 2565 salinity, and about 12% if we use 3510 salinity. So compared to the 10 to 30% we were seeing last time, this is suggesting when we look at a cumulative flux, it's kind of around 8 to 12% is the difference we see in terms of salt flux at the breach, which is not really getting at the question that we're after, which is how does it actually affect South Arm salinities? But this does tell you that there is an impact in how much salt is actually moving to the North Arm because of the Bear River influence. So then getting into this question, estimating the effect of Bear River on South Arm salinities. So do you want me to glaze over the equations or try to explain? What do you guys
What would
think?
the committee like? Probably just glaze over them.
Okay, great. Let's skip it. All right. So the take home is that using a system of equation, mass balance, water balance, I kind of ran a series of simulations saying, we know that the Bear River is entering the South Arm. What we don't know is how much it's mixing in the South Arm. And so using the mass balance, I started with a February condition. And I said, I want to predict what our salinity is in June 30th using a number of different scenarios that basically have a different fraction of how much Bear River salinity, Bear River water and salt mass mixes in the South Arm. So this plot is predicted South Arm salinity as of June 30th. That's kind of what I'm trying to predict with these different options in grams per liter. And then this on the x-axis is the fraction of Bear River mixed into the South Arm. On the far left, 0, this is kind of the simulated situation where there's no Bear River mixing into the South Arm. So that would be the instance where there's just no Bear River entering the South Arm, or where 100% of it is short circuiting to the North Arm. And then on the far right side of this x-axis is the fraction of 1, which is simulating the instance where 100% of Bear River water is mixing into the South Arm. And over this entire range, I'm estimating that the Bear River basically makes a 20 gram per liter difference in South Arm salinities in 2023 specifically.
Christine,
Yeah.
question on this. We installed Berm this past year.
Mhm.
Where do you think we would be on this curve had
So-
we not installed Berm?
Good question. This green triangle is what I estimate where we were sitting. So I estimate this year we mixed about 63% of Bear River into the South Arm. It's really hard to say what it would have been without the berm, because I don't know the extent of mixing that would have occurred without the berm. And this was a really big water year, but I also did run it for 2022, which will give you some indication. And then I kind of calculated another metric here, which is to say, what if this year we measure, I estimate we mixed about 60% of the Bear River. That led to about 13 and a half gram per liter dilution in the South Arm. If we had mixed 100% of Bear River this year, we would have gotten an estimated 6.6 gram additional dilution. So, does that make sense? Okay, cool. noticeable. And then if we go to 2022, it's a very different story. And this runoff season was different. It happened earlier. So instead of taking it all the way to the end of June, I took it to the end of April. That's just kind of when the runoff curve happened. It was much earlier and it was much smaller. And so under 2022 conditions, the range at which we predict that the Bear River is influencing the South Arm is much smaller. So 5.6 grams per liter is the full range between 0 Bear River and 100% Bear River mixing into the South Arm. And estimating that for those conditions in the spring of 2022, where we're only mixing in about 0.2 or 0.25, or 25% of the Bear River. So Joe, I don't know if that gives you some indication.
Yeah,
That was under the, we didn't have a berm in place in 2022. The runoff was much smaller, different conditions overall. But as I look at these numbers, I'm thinking the berm had an effect on this, and there was a substantial amount of mixing that occurred that may not have.
But Joe, you're talking south arm effects, not north to south underneath with the berm, right?
Because north to south was shut anyways with the first permit,
Okay.
with the partial permit.
Okay. And then I guess one more detail I'll just point out since I did it is that I also ran these calculations using the predicted 2565 salinity or the 3510 salinity. I'm still trying to wrap my brain around exactly what that means, but it basically, the point is that it just doesn't matter. The amount of salt flux moving from south to north through the breach has very minimal effect on these calculations. What really matters is the amount of water coming in from the Bear River. So that's a little nuanced, but it's less about how much salt flux is affected at the breach. It's kind of in those initial calculations I showed, and it's more about just how much water is making it into the South Arm and able to mix. Okay, and then if we jump to the estimated spring salinities, not much changed because the concentration and the volume hasn't changed a whole lot. But I did run the simulations a little bit differently because there was a request to simulate 1,000 CFS of export from the breach instead of 800, which is what we had done last time. So using the last 10 years of climate conditions, average climate conditions, there's a range of scenarios here I'll try to walk us through. So berm raise, if we raise the berm in February, that cuts off flow in February from south to north. I estimate 1,000 CFS discharge up until that point. Salinity is around 124 gram per liter. If we don't raise the berm, it's 123 salinity. If we raise it, but we have a little bit higher discharges from south to north, 123, 124. What really seems to make a difference here is based on what we saw in the Bear River mixing stuff, I said, let's take the average climate conditions, but I'm only going to use 60% of Bear River to simulate kind of what 2023 had done. And that jumps us up to 131 grams per liter. So that's just because we're not getting as much, all these other scenarios, based on how the mass balance works, they're assuming 100% of Bear River is mixing into the South Arm. So with this adjustment, we just have less volume to dilute the South Arm. And then there is a noticeable increase in salinity from that. And that's all I have, I think. So happy to answer any questions.
Christine.
Yeah. Does that help?
I think that helps a lot. And from my perspective, the best bang for the buck that we could have had last year was to impound all the water and avoid, what spilled over the top that was more diluted. And we would have had a better impact because then we could have raised or lowered it more substantially and probably had, sent the more mixed water to the North Arm. And so I think moving forward, when we talk about what to do with the berm, that should be something we should consider about being, more aggressive with it, but then also being more aggressive with when we take it down and how we take it down. Because we probably, if we'd gone higher and impounded all the water, we probably would have had scouring and settling or whatever, modified the berm too. So I think that should be part of the discussion.
I think that clearly shows that the mixing question is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was hard in the calculations because it's hard to, like Joe brought up, it's hard to know how much from the berm and how much of it is due to different hydrology in a given year. Like, I think the runoff coming in from the Berm really matters. And that's hard to simulate what that's gonna be like.
And I apologize, I'm not catching why under the berm not raised, it's lower salinity than berm raised. February with the same flow, 123 versus 123.8.
Because,
Export.
yes, exactly.
There's
There's
more.
more export. We're losing mass from the south arm. That's right. So there's, more, the acre feet of south to north is much higher. So we're minutely exporting more salt, which decreases the salinity.
Gotcha, I'm sorry.
Any other questions or?
Jeff, I think, so the next agenda item would be to talk about what we're thinking about doing with the berm, or where we at on the agenda?
Yeah, well, I think, I'm just thinking that I put some slides together last night summarizing our ideas on how to help with the mixing.
Yeah.
And so that might.
So I think maybe just to, go back to we made a recommendation back to water quality in our division about what to do back in April. And it was, we weren't able to adopt a recommendation at all, just because of the timing with the commissioner coming on and whatnot. But I think that the recommendation we made, I don't think would have necessarily worked how we thought it would have back in April, given the runoff circumstances and what happened to the berm. And so the one takeaway that I had on that recommendation was that we really need to provide the maximum amount of flexibility until we really know what's going on here. And I think that this body is, I think there should be more discretion to adapt based on like what scientific observations are made, what flows are happening, what the snowpack looks like, and then what the modeling looks like, rather than trying to be so prescriptive that we have this, prescription that can fall apart like that if conditions change like they did with the berm eroding. So I just want to throw that out there as we're thinking about how to manage this or modify this, moving forward. And then also as we develop that long-term management strategy.
Great point. Anything else? Any other questions on what Christine showed? Christine, maybe if you could send me your slides.
Yep.
I mean, not now, but you don't have to now. And then I can at least, and if people are interested in the equations, then they can see that, because you definitely put a lot of work.
Christy, thank you.
Yeah, good.
You put a lot of work into it, and
I
that,
did. I'm glad.
so thank you.
Maybe it would be nice to, I don't know if you're willing to do that, Christine, is share the projection slides.
Yeah. Mhm. Yep,
Be
I'll share
great.
that. Yeah. That way you can all check my work. Feel free.
We're still trying to
it's
wrap
just-
our brains around it. is what we're trying to do.
Darn.
That's very easy. Trying to make notes, but I can't follow.
I'm happy to explain it more. I want it to be clear.
Well, I had the same question that Joel had, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that difference. If you actually have a higher salinity, if you build up the berm, it's counterintuitive, but.
Just storing
Well,
more mass in the south.
but I think that's temporary too, right? Like as soon as it starts to spill, or as soon as you take it down, assuming you have the full mixing, then you're able to export it more efficiently. So it's just
You get the
temporary.
effect the next,
Yeah.
the next year. Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
I wasn't focusing on the mass column.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
That's that question.
Well, I think that's important too, because if we just closed off as people have suggested, like when we did build the berm, like it's closed off, and that would be counterintuitive. And I don't think it's even an option, right? We always have to have that connectivity to the north arm, and you let the north arm serve as like a sink, where we can precipitate sodium. But yeah, that's the way this is going to have to function.
There's been so many.
Quoting you. Yeah.
There's been so
Yeah,
many.
the north arm will have to. I mean, that's it.
Every time
Too bad it's
USGS,
harder in the south arm, huh?
We're gonna talk about that.
every time USGS presents at the issues forum on saltancy and whatnot, they always talk about it's from their perspective, the luxury we have of having a salt sink in the north arm, as opposed to the conditions in California.
Right.
Tomas, to get back to your point, so in the top of the table, all of those are assuming that there's 100% mixing of Bear River water in the North Arm. And so under that scenario, when you export that one that was 123, the reason it is because it's exporting more salt than water. Those are incorrect because we know there's only a fraction of Bear River mixing in the South Arm, which is what I tried to provide in that lower one, saying 60%.
60% mixing.
Yes, it's really hard to assume a combination of those things. So I know I present it in a way that's like, okay, compare these different factors and see how it changes them. It's very incremental. It's really hard for me to integrate it into like, here's the answer, if that makes sense.
We have too many variables.
Yes, yeah. And it's hard to predict what they all will be. Yeah. But I'm happy
That
to
makes sense.
plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is we talked, benefits of not sending fresh water to the North Arm, or the fact that doing that doesn't help Compass at all. I know Joe was very concerned that we would close off the berm and never export. But I think even with the volumes we're talking now will not help Compass a tremendous amount on their, especially the West Ponds and that operation. So seems like we're solely exporting from salt.
We're so below a tremendous amount. That threshold, and we're one out of 12.
So one of the questions I think we need,
But to maintain, to stay true to what this committee recommended in the path forward of opening, in 513, Bill 513 mandates that there's connectivity between the two arms. Just to stay true to that is important. I'm not trying to.
well, I'm not trying to advocate anything different. It's just the fact that we are exporting for salt control. We're not really doing it to help Compass out. What we really need to do to help Compass in their business is to support extension of their canals in the North Arm, which will get them the volume restored that they need. And then I think this committee, longer term, we're going to have to kind of own that North Arm. What does it look like in the future, and what are we going to do with it? Because we are sending water, but not enough.
If I can correct one thing, it's not to restore volume. It's just to maintain connectivity. To restore volume, that's a complete revamp.
We don't have enough.
Revamp of the entire 6 mile long canal and sumps. This is just to maintain, just to limp along, not to restore volume.
Well,
And I
can
know
I ask what the difference is in maintaining connectivity versus being able to most efficiently, send water or, brines to the north? Like if we were to say, let's build the wall all the way up to the train tracks and you impound it, and then every spring, at the optimal time, like say at the end of June, you open it up and you take it all the way back down to like 4187 and you just blast water through. Why would that be any different for you than maintaining connectivity all year and maybe losing those benefits of like a big water year like we did last year? Because we probably could have gone down.
There's a thesis for either, right? For either scenario.
But what's your thesis for the scenario of maintaining connectivity?
The berm, when we, aligned on the construction of the berm, it was a temporary berm.
Mhm.
Temporary has regulatory meaning.
Sure.
So it's more staying true to that. When the lake elevation, when the north arm goes below 4192, we really start to struggle. And you have a kind of a fall off a cliff.
Sure.
4189, we're one pump part of the year.
What I had suggested is temporary because we'd be raising and lowering it, more frequently within a year. And I think the temporary term is also Army Corps regulation. So temporary to us is not the same in that world.
The thesis of doing sort of a temporal release. So if we were to release tomorrow until February, we could time our pumping accordingly.
Sure.
And do kind of a relative to what we've done over decades. Really plan and prepare to do the pumping then to fill just a snapshot of the.
We're maximizing
of the
a couple
ponds.
inches is what we're maximizing.
Yeah.
At least taking advantage of.
I think the distinction is if we were to say that we're gonna seal it up, or, we're gonna fill in the bridge and leave it, that would be permanent versus the concept that we've been under.
That would be a much different process.
Right. Right. What we're working with now is the fact that it's that berm, even if we raise it up to completely contain the south arm, is that our intent is to bring it back down.
I think that there's one thing that we've learned in the last like 2-3 years. It's that we have to have the north arm we need to be able to move sodium to the north arm. So we have to do that. So there's not an option just to impound it and leave the south arm, and that'd be detrimental. We'd end up collecting salinity, and we would end up with a smaller lake that would end up probably at saturation one day, if we left it that way. So the idea is that it has to be temporary, and we have to come up with a paradigm where we're, lowering the berm and exporting that salinity, when it's possible. But I think like hanging our hats on this idea that it has to stay connected for some reason it just seems a bit arbitrary. Like, let's do what's best and figure out how it's going to work for Compass. Maybe you do have to shift when you pump, but let's figure out what's best for the ecology of the lake and the south arm, and then figure out how we make sure that suits your needs as well. So I think there's flexibility of timing, and also I think when we get into the idea of like mixing and then maybe some other ideas, I don't know if you included the culvert portion of our discussion in there, Jeff, but I'll just say this, that I think that maybe looking back to where we came from with those culverts, I know that was problematic because they sunk and they got filled in, but now that we have this opening in the breach, I don't know that we'd have the same sinking option, or sinking issue. But what if we were to put in a series of culverts that we could more easily control, and we were actually taking, so then when the deep brine layer exists, we're actually taking the heavier brines from the south arm and moving them to the north. So then the mixing doesn't become an issue, and the whole thing was sealed off again, and you had as many culverts as it would take to move that volume of water. I think there's a lot of different ways we can do that. And then, maintaining a little bit of headspace on the south arm could give that positive pressure to the north arm. I think this is like a big engineering question, but to me, we need to get more creative than this rock berm that we take up and down every year and try to figure out if we can't encourage mixing, then we can't modify the lake bed or put in a big, straight from Fremont to to Promontory. What else can we do? And I think that the culverts is maybe a relatively low cost.
I don't disagree with you,
solution,
but you talk to the UP on that. I mean, they
I don't think they would have
they essentially went to the Corps in Washington D.C. to get the culverts closed.
Yeah,
an emergency authorization.
Sure.
I'd imagine it's going to be hard to get them to.
I honestly don't think it would be. I think that they would actually, if we had something where it's us maintaining it and not them, and it's engineered, I think that not only would the Corps be ecstatic to help come up with this solution, I think they would actually help us with the design of this. And then I think Union Pacific would be absolutely pumped to relieve themselves of this idea that they maybe are going to be on the hook to be transporting rocks and, moving things around for us in perpetuity. And it might be something we have to replace like every 5 or 10 years because of issues. But right now, like the other culverts got clogged because nobody was maintaining them. It was kind of like this abandoned idea of, nobody cared, but now everybody cares. And so if we're maintaining culverts and taking care of stuff, I don't think we'll ever get back to that point.
Bill has his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, Ben, I think these creative ideas are really worth bouncing around. And I think what you're saying is if you had culverts that you could open at depth in order to move deeper brine back into the north arm without, while you have the pressure head due to the higher head in the south arm, that would be interesting. But I wouldn't go too far down that road because it's hard to form a deep brine layer in the south arm without having the north arm already flowing in. And in our experience, you don't form a deep brine layer in the south arm unless it's come from the north arm. So I wouldn't go.
Bill, if I can maybe just respond, because it's not necessarily about the deep brine layer. It's more about the mixing. So if you could extend those culverts out, from the causeway and have a little bit of distance, I think that there would be an advantage to not only having to think about that, that freshwater lens when it exists. And I know you hate that term, but I know like when it rains, we get precipitation events, that takes a minute to mix in. So there's that. And then there's also the fact that like, if it is coming out of the Bear River and it's hugging along that, it's going to be a lot harder for that water to find that opening. And we could also do it at the opportune time. So if we waited till after spring runoff, crank those things open, we would be getting the best mixing. And then the only other thing I'd say is like, we did observe some stratification this spring, right? I mean, wasn't that the general observation is there were heavier brines at the bottom. So I think that even if it was just, you know, a small gain, we could get more dense brines and we could more micromanage that. You know, if we had 15 different culverts down there and you had you know, you could raise 5 of them and slow roll it all year or whatever that looked like. Those are just some of the dumb ideas that I think have been kicked around since we've been doing this. We've also talked about like having a big old curtain that forces the brines, or I mean the water from the Bear and Weaver coming in and, you know, forces it down and perhaps encourages mixing. But it seems to me like anything we do, it's going to need to be long lasting, and we're going to have be operating under a paradigm that we're probably going to be dealing in anything below like 4195, 4198. We're probably always going to be dealing with salinity that's on the upper higher end of the threshold that we want to be at. So it'd be nice to have some flexibility there.
No, I totally agree. I didn't mean to shoot that down so much as just to say there's a hydraulic aspect to this that I think a working group subcommittee to explore some of these creative options would be worthwhile to spin on.
Yeah, I need smart guys like you and then you know, like the USGS folks to do the engineering and understand like if we could move, you know, with the different densities and things like how that would work. I think it's just at this point an idea, but it's more of just trying to move away from this idea of just moving this pile of rocks back and forth and dealing with erosion and all of the other issues that we've seen. So,
yeah, and I still think we should divert the arts funds to spiral jetties next to the Fremont Channel.
Yeah, I like it.
Thomas?
I actually had the same comment as Ben did. But generally speaking, I do think if we have in the next 2 decades the same sort of climate that we've had in the past decade, then, you know, if we just leave that same surface area of the lake that we've had in the past 2 decades, we're going to end up without a lake. I mean, that's the reality. So if you're looking at long term, I think we do have to look at all of these engineering solutions. Some of the ones you're suggesting, Ben, and maybe there have to be additional ones.
Yeah. Agree.
And figure out how we get brine to Compass, or how Compass gets brine from the South Arm or other mechanism.
Well, it's a big conversation. I mean, this is the reality is that there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot at stake. So we have an entire ecosystem. We also have a publicly traded company, you know, the South Arm industry. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that we want to keep everybody happy, but the reality is like something has to give somewhere. And so it might be that the state has to invest some money into the, you know, the infrastructure to do more efficiently send those waters or mix it. But I don't know what it looks like right now, but I think maybe that's a good segue into your
So what I tried to do here is just try to characterize some of the ideas that we've been talking about. And I guess starting with what our goal is, we want to maintain the salinity of the South Arm between 120 to 160. And then our berm management protocol, we wanted to have 130 in the spring, and we want to make sure we stay above 120 in the fall to be protective of mineral extraction. And overall, we want to stay below 160. And as Christine was just reviewing, you know, I think this last year, and certainly what we've become aware here more recently, is that the salinity at the breach water that's going into the North Arm is lower than what we've observed in the South Arm. And so the question is this mixing question? Is that, you know, and then can we better mix the freshwater inflow in the South Arm so that we can maximize the export of salt to the North Arm? And so the question is, how do we do that? And this is just a photo I found, and this is what we've been talking about, is the flow from the Bear River coming north of Fremont Island and extending along the causeway out toward where the bridge is. So the first idea we've been talking about has been, you know, can we redirect the flow south of Fremont Island? And so here you see the inflows from the 3 primary surface water tributaries from Bear River, Weber River, and Farmington Bay. Of course, with the lake low, Weber River is forced north along with, to mix with Bear River as it comes in as well. And so what we talked about was, well, can we somehow move that water south of Fremont Island? And And we talked about that could be done perhaps with a dike that connects Fremont Island with Promontory Point. The state Division of Water Resources did a study back in '85 where they looked at actually putting dikes from Promontory Point all the way down to near I-80. So they already did a lot of engineering on that. But one of the key things that I know we had to sort through when we were looking at what we call Willard Spur down here is just that there's a sandbar that extends from Fremont Island down into Farmington Bay, and it's roughly at 4194.5. And secondly, there's another berm or a rise where we have 94.2 here along the that goes east towards the Weber River. And what that does is it just causes a kind of a perched pond or a feature in the lake bed here where when the lake is as low as it is now, it fills up in the spring from runoff that's coming in through Howard Slough and Ogden Bay, and then it becomes a salt bed by the end of the year. So if we wanted to push water through here, we would have to build a dike, to cause the water to be high enough to go over those sandbars and or dredge some kind of a channel to allow that flow to come around and mix with Farmington Bay. And I was just thinking through, our berm management protocol, the recommendations that we had really looked at managing the berm within this paradigm of the lake lower than 4192. That this is when we've had the high salinities that we were concerned about. And you can see here just the last 10 years, obviously the last 4 years or so has been that paradigm where we've been. So if the lake does stay at or below 4192, we would have to push the water up at 2 feet to get over those sandbars that are there. And so that's just summary is to be able to get water to the south of the island, we would have to somehow push the water up high up and over those sandbars.
It really feels like you want to coax it through it with a channel.
Yeah.
Because I think you're going to lose a lot through evaporation as it pulls up there, as you start getting in the beginning of evaporations.
You could consider that regardless to capture that water rather than let it evaporate at surface during the summer.
Bill?
Yeah, just that you raise a very good point. We've been talking about this in the strike team, and but yes, a channel would be able to bring that water through because it's not a whole lot of depth to excavate, and it's not a whole lot of length either. And once you got the flow going through there, it's got very high erosive power because the deep part of the lake is just off to the west of that lower arrow, and so it would work quite well. So I wouldn't use that sill as an argument against a dike or some structure. It should be addressable. It would have to be checked though with some geophysical surveys to make sure there isn't hard rock within 2 meters of depth from the surface. But that would be easy to do. That'd be very easy.
Yep. Yeah, well, I think that 1985 study, I think they did do some borings out there. So they did think through. They actually had a big pump station here to get water over the dikes into the lake.
And their purpose was?
They were wanting to pond up the fresh water. Kind of, I guess, call it a very large Willard Bay. So yes, I mean, you're right, Bill. I think it's definitely something that could be engineered. I guess we would just need to make sure we consider how do we actually. It's not a matter of just directing the water through here. There would have to be an engineered solution that infrastructure could do that. Then another option or idea that we talked about was a dike that would extend south from Promontory Point. And obviously there's a lot of locations that this could be done, but the idea would be to try to divert or push the water to the south instead of along the causeway. And in this scenario you see here, the dike would have to be about a 1.5 miles long at least is what I showed here. It could be shorter, it could be longer. It just depends on what the actual hydraulics would work. The dike could be further to the west. It's just a matter of well, it's not just a matter, it's complicated, but we would have to figure out how, what would be the optimal orientation for it. But a dike would be permanent. I think the result in terms of, we don't know how the mixing would occur. What orientation would we want to have there? A dike would be a navigation hazard, a new structure out there. And then I think there's a question we talked about last month was also we're talking about mixing, but do we have an understanding of how the mixing actually, what we've seen in the last year or two is that fresh water that's coming in, it actually was what really helped the Artemia get through, survive the high salinities that we have. And so that there's still that question there. The idea number 3 is, as Ben mentioned, is very similar. Instead of a dike where we would have fill on the lake bed, we would have a floating boom to direct the surface flows to the south. And I think this is a concept that's not new by any means. We have lots of different types of floating booms that are used at reservoirs. These are curtains that are literally floated from the surface. Here's another another structure that was engineered where you've got a big HDPE pipe where they actually welded a plastic wall below it that extends down. I know Jacobs built an 80-foot wall on the Snake River on one of the dams there because we wanted to divert the surface flows and the juvenile salmon that are coming down the Snake River. We wanted to get them away from the powerhouse to the spillways. And so that was a 80-foot steel structure that literally floated. I mean, huge thing, but they're talking to 80,000 CFS coming down. All said is that this is doable in terms of a floating boom. And I think a key difference here with the dike is it's less permanent. It's something that we could float out there. If it didn't work, it could conceivably be removed versus a dike is a lot harder to remove. But similar questions. I think that the floating boom, when I was in grad school, we had huge physical models of reservoirs on the Columbia and the Snake River where we're doing this. And so it's all about the hydraulics of how these flows are mixing, how they're flowing through these open waters. And it took a lot of analysis to figure out the optimal orientation and depth and et cetera. But it can be engineered to do that.
Bill had a comment.
Oh, Bill?
Sorry, I wrote it. Just that they aren't really surface flows during runoff. It's a very strong current in Fremont Strait that extends down towards the bottom. And so it's really more of a channel during runoff. Now, I'm not saying it's not a bad idea. I'm just saying that not all the flow is near the surface.
Okay.
So a couple other things that probably needs to be kept in mind, like what Joe was saying about a channel going out there, that's probably the way to go, because if you pool up stuff in Ogden Bay there, you're probably going to get some or encourage botulism conditions because of getting those stagnant pools, and you don't want that. So you want the flow going immediately out to the lake if possible. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is sedimentation there. How is that going to change anything that you do? Because there's a change in that flow all the time coming out from Bear River because of the sedimentation there, depending on the flows.
Thomas?
I just want to reemphasize one of the comments that you made with regard to the Artemia population is what we don't know today is we don't know how much these, let's say, lower salinity lenses contribute to the hatchability of the Artemia in the spring. We know they're there. We know they're very significant. We know there is significant stratification throughout several months that coincides with when the Artemia population hatches. So we definitely have a concern about, mixing mixing that prior to these lower salinity lenses reaching the main body of water and potentially contributing to the hatching of the Artemia.
I would just say that, to add to what Thomas is saying, the mixing, like, I think we've had this struggle with, like, how do we make sure the water is mixed before it gets to the North Arm? But if we did something, if we pursued some method where we could either have a gate or culverts, whatever it looks like, to send brines from the deeper areas of the lake to the North Arm, then maybe we wouldn't want it to mix. Like, there might be an advantage to letting it continue to do what it's been doing. So I think exploring that, other idea about what do we do aside from a rock fill berm and not take the water off the surface and try to shoot for something that can be more adaptable to move those brines back and forth wherever we need from the bottom.
Possibly cheaper too.
Yeah, it'd be cheaper too. Like, I can't imagine, like, we had to build something out of these culverts. Like, I don't know what kind of, we'd have to do all this. You'd have to do all this engineering probably, Jeff. But it would probably, I don't think it would be that expensive. Like, I think we could make it pretty crude and have the same effect. It doesn't have to be, an $80 million project. I think we could probably get around for a few mils.
Yeah, well, I guess this next slide is something else. I can't remember if it was John or Andrew at the last meeting reminded me of Wally Gwynn's 2002 book. And in there, there's a paper in there by Julie Rich from Weber State University, where she talked about the circulation patterns in the lake. And so these, hopefully you can see this all right. So this first figure is from actual field studies in 69 and 71, where these different groups were mapping, trying to, taking samples, synoptic surveys around the lake. And so as a result of their field work, they documented, here are the general circulation patterns that they were observing. And so what you can see here is generally there's, and I think this is the thing that was a new thought, is that we've got Farmington Bay coming up through here. We have Bear River and Weber River coming through here. And note that in this time period, the water levels were 93.5 to about 95.5. So not too far from where we are. But generally what they observed was a counterclockwise circulation pattern in Carrington Bay and then also in Gilbert Bay. Then in 74, somebody they put some buoys out there and this was just for no more than 2 to 4 hours. In one place it says 2 hours, in one place they said 4 hours. They were trying to look at circulation patterns between the deep brine and the shallow layer, and they found a difference. They were actually counter each other. And so the deep brine was going clockwise, and then the upper layer was going counterclockwise. But you can see that at the shallow layer, it's different than what was observed by the others in the field. And the caveat there that Julie Rich made is that this was just over a couple hours.
It was a much higher elevation too.
Yeah. Yep.
Which would have you would have that Fremont sandbar would be underwater, so you would alter the Bear River, Weber River. I mean, there's big differences, right?
Yep. And then in 75, they did some additional work. And here I think the circulation patterns are similar to what was observed in right around 1970 at the shallower lake level. But here they observed 2 different circulation cells, one in the southern part of Gilbert Bay and one in the northern part. Bill, did you have something? I just saw your hand up.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. there's been subsequent studies looking at the hydrodynamic the gyres here using hydrodynamic modeling. And they largely agree with this. The question is, how much the southernmost gyre there that is counterclockwise, how far north that reaches, right?
Right.
And that, of course, feeds directly into this question about the usefulness, the utility of diverting flow south of Fremont Island. But these other hydrodynamic studies exist, and what they show is the gyres are a result of a combination of inflow from the water inflows and wind forcing, right? There's there's multiple forcings on this that create these gyres. So I don't really believe the rotation they show for the deep brine layer. That's more of a pool filling process. But be that as it may, this is the surface gyres are worth considering.
Yep. Good. Yeah. So then they also include this. So this is actually a hydrodynamic model that was done in '79, and the Rich paper had a bunch of caveats on there that they weren't able to get into the field to validate the results. Here you actually see a different flow pattern, clockwise flow pattern in the northern part of Gilbert Bay. That's different than what was observed. And then what Julie Rich did, summarized work that they put some tracking buoys out, working with NOAA, and they tracked buoys over a period of time, several months. And she came up with this additional, I guess, try to summarize, here's the results of their field studies. And there you can see, these different circulation patterns being similar, counterclockwise circulation pattern in the northern part of, I guess the middle part of Gilbert Bay, clockwise portion in southern part, but a similar pattern over in Carrington Bay. And I think what hit me here was, I think we've been talking a lot about Bear River Bay or Bear River inflows coming in across from Farmington or north of Fremont Island. That's where Weaver River is also coming through, but we also have Farmington Bay. All of these different studies that have been done at these different lake levels show, Farmington Bay flows also, going towards the north. And then just for my point of reference is if I look at where our bridge is, that's way over here in the west corner of the causeway. I guess the question that came to my mind is how much of this is really Bear River versus all three rivers coming in. Yeah.
So am I reading that right, that the study timeframe was 2015 to 2023?
Oh, no, that's the water level.
Oh.
That was done, this was done in the, right around, I think she was, I don't remember the dates on the field study.
So 71.
It was published in 2002 or 40. Yeah, 2002.
And this is all going to be when the culvert's still happening, just prior to anything being closed, switching to the berm.
Right.
So we've made physical altercations, but they haven't, at least the culverts also. So.
The west breach was, active at that time. We had those elevations.
Any elevation above 94, the west breach is flowing.
So there are additional variables potentially.
So, but I guess my, aha moment was, oh, this isn't just Bear River, potentially. The gyres down in the southern part of Gilbert Bay are certainly very interesting, but I think just posed the question of, well, how much of that lower salinity that we're seeing at the breach is really just because of the Bear River, or is that we have Farmington Bay and Weaver River all playing with each other? Each of these different patterns that was observed seems to, here it shows the water going from Farmington Bay east of Fremont Island. That would have had to be, at the higher lake level to get over that sandbar. But you have those mixing of flows here that are coming around and creating those different circulation patterns.
You could have evolving bathymetry as well. from the sixties to present, the sandbars may not have been in existence or just different.
Bill mentioned there were some subsequent studies, later studies that we should consider.
Bill, do you know if you mentioned some other hydrodynamic modeling that did
Yeah.
those all show Farmington Bay influence at the north end?
No, they show the gyres. And so, I mean, Jeff, I got to call this out, but you're going to hate me. But these red lines are dangerously close to hurricane prediction by a former president. So we got to be careful about this. What I do vote for is putting a folder together that we can put these studies into and compare. So if you want to set that up, I'll throw those other two studies I know of in there. And if you can throw these in there, we can thumb through this stuff.
Yep. Great. And I also wonder, I mean, the brine shrimp cooperative, and you guys are out there chasing streaks on the surface. I mean, you guys are probably the experts in terms of circulation patterns out there. And
I mean, they do vary. We see that vary from year to year in our harvesting patterns. But yeah, some of these patterns sort of do coincide with some of these, circulation patterns that you're seeing here for sure. Yeah, we sometimes there can be no wind, and the water can be moving at 4 miles an hour. You'd have to sort of move with the water to be able to capture any of those streaks that are formed at the time. But we think that some of these patterns may also contribute to some of these streaks actually coming together. But I just don't know enough about it.
Keith?
I just wanted to add to Joe's point about the bathymetry changing. The timing of these studies related to fragmization would be pretty important because they're prior to thousands of acres of fragmites trapping sediment. You get a different pattern.
And then pre and post flooding. I mean, some of these studies are pre-flooding. I'd imagine there was some pretty significant flux during those years.
Well, and we saw, if you look at, we saw some of these stratification of that less dense brine around Stansbury Island this year. We could definitely see some of these patterns that we're bringing in that less saline water, freshwater land in brackets. So yeah, I think it just changes from year to year. Phil mentioned, and I think that's worth noting too, is that the adaptive management berm that we have today actually does help us with the mixing. It allows for that stratification in the spring as we build up the berm. It allows for that stratification. It allows time for mixing, and then opening up that berm, then still allows that water to move north. And I agree with Ben, it might be even more efficient if we could, do it with some culverts that we could adjust. But we already have a tool that definitely helps us with this.
Well, to your timing point too, Joe, I wonder even if, while it's stratified, like we just discussed, that might be the best timing. So maybe it would coincide with spring runoff. And the biggest advantage would be before it fully mixes. So we're getting it while it's stratified, and it'd be much more like the natural hydrologic cycle rather than like pushing it over there, in the winter sometime where you guys would have to modify your operation. So there's a lot to be considered there.
So I think the key questions that I saw are, is this only a Bear River influence? What impact would these different interventions out in the open water have on lake flow patterns and ecology? Will it accomplish what we intend? Are there other unintended consequences? I think there's a lot of important questions to consider as we look at that. And which I think, coming back to raising the berm, with per the protocol we've identified, is, if we raise and lower the berm, does that accomplish the mixing, that we're talking about? But I think we're also learning about, well, what other consequences might there be? And so that's, I think, so coming back full circle to the berm question, is, I think there's a short-term question that we probably want to talk about do we want to change the berm here then in the near future? I think coming up with a creative solution for how to manage flows through the bridge for the long term is certainly something that we need to do. But I think from a schedule standpoint, I want to make sure we talk about, what you all think about, lowering the berm, maybe in the next month. I think there's one thing we talked about, and then raising it again in February to close it off, and lowering it again in July, August timeframe to flush salts back out.
I'd be pretty curious to know if anybody's run numbers to determine, how much we could move if we raise or if we lowered the berm down to say like 4187, just take the V notch and cut across it. How much or what are we actually going to gain off of that? Like how many acre feet of water? What would the salinity difference or export be, or the salt flux, and yeah, what would we get out of that? Because I think we have to decide like how much it's worth the time and effort and funding to do that, when we could utilize that funding for other things that maybe would have a bigger impact. We don't have bottomless pockets on those things.
Christine ran a couple scenarios.
Some of that.
And it didn't seem like it was that big. It seemed pretty nominal.
I don't remember, but to 4187, I don't think it was huge, but
It was like 5 to 8 grams per liter is what I recall.
yeah,
Like
something.
single digits, but when your
5 to 8
protocol,
grams per liter between now, or would that have been if we done that right at the end of runoff? Because like at this point, I don't think we could move. Like we lowered it down to 4187. My gut is that like flows might come up with a couple hundred CFS. But I don't know. Like it's even when the lake level was at 41. 94 or 41, is that what it topped out at 4194? Even when it was there, we were still at only 1200 CFS.
when it was full open, it was bigger than.
I think the highest.
When it was
I
full
remember-
open, wasn't it? Like more like 3,000 or 4,000.
Oh, when it was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
2016.
I'm just thinking like, so if we were to take it to 4187 now and add that extra, 2 or 3 feet there, it'd be similar to like what we had when we were at the maximum difference this spring.
4187 is a couple feet below north arm level right now, isn't that right?
Mhm.
So would we risk return flow of heavy brine at that point?
Probably, yes.
So you want to make sure that didn't happen, because that would offset whatever export you're doing pretty quickly.
But when we constructed the partial berm, we pretty much cut off north to south flow.
We did for a while, but I think then it started to.
Well, we didn't give it enough time to, we did for a while and then we raised the berm higher, but it zeroed out. I recall that vividly. It was effective. But
There was a period and then it started to flow back and then we raised it higher and shut it off.
I thought it just was sitting there. We did cut it off.
I think we did cut it off. There were some discharge measurements from north to south that were a little higher, and I think we suspected were during kind of in response to some kind of wind event.
there was a wind event. I remember one wind event, like just pulsed in for a
Yeah.
day or two.
For the most part, they were
Really come back.
or zero.
I think to answer the question of how much flow, I mean, just looking at 1,000 CFS versus 500 CFS for 60 days, it's a difference of about 60,000 acre feet. So if we drop, I guess we're at 600 something CFS now. If we leave it there, I guess I was assuming 500 CFS, that's about 60,000 acre feet that we would move next December, January. If we doubled that by opening up the breach for that 2-month period, that would add 60,000 acre feet.
What would the salt, do you have any rough estimates on what salt flux would be on 60,000 acre feet, or what that would mean? It just the dumb and dirty math that I like.
Let me
This
see.
is the unadulterated.
Bill did point out, even fairly what seems like a modest shift in salinity on a yearly time scale, on a cumulative time scale, can become quite significant. So
But I think that my point on this would be that just because we can do it like right this moment doesn't mean we won't do it next spring as well. Like if we were to say, okay, like what are we going to gain this year out of this? maybe we put the effort and the funding into the engineering of something that's more robust, and then plan on taking it down to 4187 after spring runoff this year. And I don't think we're going to see much evaporation between now and then. So I don't think we'd be losing a ton, and we're in pretty good shape as far as salinity goes right now. And we'd still see that 60,000 acre feet or so move to the north on them. So I don't know, that was kind of my.
When would we build it back up?
That's the question. Like right now, we need to decide that, because I think there's a risk of like the snowstorm that's coming this weekend. If we start getting blasted, I think water managers are going to start releasing water out of their dams, and so we could lose an opportunity by not having the berm built like now, versus you roll the dice and you wait till February like we did last year, and maybe winter never comes and we lost all the opportunity. Yeah, so it just depends. I think for right now, it's kind of a big old dice roll, and nobody's crystal ball seems to be working. So we got.
Don't we have a benefit in going more aggressively, building it up, and then we can always open it up later?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is I think we missed that opportunity last time because we were just kind of playing with it. Should have been a lot more aggressive to start with. That way we would have taken advantage of it a lot more. So if we're gonna do something, it needs to be definitive.
When's the best time to open it back up if you want to see mixing, for example? And
I would say like towards the end of June, once we start to see the
Know where your level
flows
is.
subside.
And it'll depend a lot on the runoff.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
big runoff, it takes longer for the snow to reach the lake and longer for that to mix in. This year it was quite late. If you get a low runoff here, it'll mix much sooner.
In 2022, we could have opened it up at the beginning of May and had the same effect on that. But I think that this year, like, it doesn't make sense to build it back to 4192, because that's essentially like we're already, like, it wouldn't have the impact of capturing any of the runoff. So if we're going to do anything this year, it either needs to be to just leave it open and see what happens. And I think we're not getting the most efficient, mixing and export of salt, or we build it up and we go big and try to capture all the runoff, and then go big when we take it down at the opportune time once we see that the stratification is gone and we know the mixing is. I mean, those are the kind of like scientific observations I think would guide this. And I think if we try to be too prescriptive about like when we release it, it has to be based on like what we're observing out there, and we don't know what the snowpack's going to do this year. There's a lot to be determined.
there's a time for you, Joe, and those are more or less beneficial, or is it more just having some sense of when that could be?
I mean, none of these are ideal. And this isn't really just about compass. This is, more off of the lake. But having it open, having some flow come in, under this lake level ratio is helpful. For compasses perspective.
Is it not more helpful when the concentrations are higher though? I mean, don't you guys want higher concentrations? Because if you get
that's not a part of the dashboard I look at. The system was designed to operate in the middle, 4200, 4198. If you're bringing in too high a concentration, you get precipitation too early in your process. Cargill had this problem a couple years ago, where it's actually outside the design parameters, and they had a problem doing that. So pulling in higher concentration, there's probably some benefit, in parts of the operation, but generally, no. We subscribe to the healthy lake elevation as well. A fairly constant, more dilute concentration. But I recall the presentation Christine gave last time. There was 5 grams per liter benefit.
3 to 8, I think.
Sorry.
The minimum was 3, the maximum was 8, if I recall correctly.
And when you consider that our healthy salinity regime is from 120 to 160. I mean, 5 grams per liter out of that 40 emits a 12% benefit. I say that's materially beneficial.
Well, that'll only
But
be
I think
realized.
we've already
after spring
realized a
runoff,
lot of
right?
that.
Yeah.
With the breach, with the breach overflowing, and then, sort of the erosion.
And we don't lose concentration by doing that. That's only realized once we get the spring runoff. And so at this point, if we're going to plan to be taking it down to a certain level anyway, you're just postponing that export of salt, and the benefit would be realized the following spring. So my point is that if it's 60, if we're gonna get a benefit of 60,000 acre feet, like, did you?
Yeah,
Yep.
sorry. So, relative, yeah, give me one second. I haven't quite got there.
Because if we have a benefit of 60,000 acre feet, and it relates to, whatever the salt flux would be in that 60,000 acre feet, and let's figure out what that looks like. But if it's not that great, let's save the money and the time, the labor, all of the other things that we have, and do it right, figure out what it looks like. I just don't think there's gonna be that big of a benefit in 60,000 acre feet at this point. And knowing that we're gonna have the same benefit if we were to just postpone that one year. Because we're in a decent range right now, so it's not gonna hurt to.
But it'd be nice to have another data point, because right now we have one. That's easy to pivot off of that, but it'd be nice to do another raise. Maybe even we just repeat what we did and see what effects we have with a different runoff.
Well, we raise it to 4192, we're already spilling, so it means everything that comes in, we're gonna get that 60% efficiency, or maybe less even, with knowing that it's immediately doing, we had no mixing. Or no time for it to mix.
We assume it's all gonna repeat, yeah.
That would be nice.
I think there's a lot of variables.
So I think the scenario that we talked about, I landed at the end of the last meeting, was that we would raise the berm to 4195 in February, and then we would drop it down to significantly flush flow up in the July timeframe. Was the concept that we had talked about, and we had also talked about opening it up further here this winter. And so I think that's one part of the question is can we open it up now, and does that help? I think
The salt dump, for lack of a better term, opening up, I mean, that was October. So we lost a month on that, but there was that 5 grams per liter benefit. And then, whenever we want to build it back up.
That's happened. Because of all the inflow.
Well,
It's just overflowing.
and I can't recall, but was that 5 gram per liter based on the elevation of the berm being at 4192, or did that take into account what we were seeing in flows through the erosion of the berm? I mean, I honestly can't remember where we were at on that, but
Most of those were, I think, based on Jeff's estimated flows through the breach, modeling it as a broad crested weir. So it's always been hard to account for the kind of the new shape of the V notch.
well, and it was also assuming that we were getting full concentration or full mixing. So it was the same concentration that we were seeing in the south arm, and that none of the influences of fresh water that has been coming in were being influenced. So it's likely less than that, I would say. But I'm not,
Looking.
I don't think I think we could take the berm down right now. It's just, again, it's like, if we're talking about potentially going out there and raising it like now, which in my opinion, if I had the magic one right now, it'd be like, let's go out and let's just capture everything this year. Let's raise it up to 4195, capture all the fresh water, and then plan on spring, like whenever runoff subsides. We'll go out there and we'll take it down to whatever the salinity committee thinks is the best benefit for the export of salinity. Because I don't think we could export too much salinity where we're at right now. Like, I think like if we could get a good export, we would be in really good shape for coming years, which we can probably expect more drought moving into the next few years.
We may not have another opportunity like that in the next decade.
Exactly.
Because we've had a big influx. Reservoirs are nearly full. We're still having inflow.
Soil moisture.
This may be a 1 in a 10-year opportunity.
I agree.
So there's only like
I hope I'm wrong, by the way.
Me too. There's only like a 0.2 of a gram per liter decrease, I'm estimating, with the 60,000 acre foot increase. So yeah, the ratcheting of salt mass down in the south arm, I see as it's a long-term investment. It is something you plan ahead for and you ratchet down gradually. I think based on the Bear River mixing exercise that I did, it's really showing that the amount of water that enters and mixes in the south arm is the biggest lever on decreasing salinity or changing salinity. So I think it depends on your objective. If you want to decrease salinity, capture Bear or capture the water. If you want to ratchet down salt mass, export it to the north arm.
which our protocol does both, doesn't it?
It's a combo.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
by raising the berm, we
first.
capture it,
Mhm.
we mix it, we dilute it, and then we lower the berm, we export.
Well, I would just say, because we only have 24 minutes left, and we owe, well, I told Don that we would try to help craft that question that, the good way that we could take back to the advisory council. So I think we should move on from this, but I think that, I do think that we should be prepared to potentially meet, under the status of like, we may need to make a decision sooner than later based on conditions. Like if we get a few feet of snow in the mountains this week and water managers start getting nervous and everybody's opening their gates, like we might want to get out there and build that berm up right away. And I woke up at like 2 a.m. the other night and had oh crap moment. And realized that like, we really need to have this, this should be ready now. Like we shouldn't be waiting. So if someone would ask me today, well, I don't know. I think that we should be ready to make a recommendation to capture spring runoff. I mean, that would be my position right now if anybody were to.
Even fall runoff.
Yeah.
Winter runoff and spring runoff.
Winter and spring runoff, yeah, like let's try to capture, get the biggest benefit that we can. And I think we can also resolve that we all agree that there's a massive benefit to exporting as much of that to the North Arm as we can. So that we would resolve that when the conditions are prime, come spring, that we're doing that. So I mean, I know you have concerns, Joe, and I get them, but I think that it's just a matter of like, I don't know why we wouldn't do this right. Like this seems like the most logical way to manage this. But anyway, I don't know.
Any other thoughts, Jim, Harris, or John?
I make a motion to build it up to 4190, whatever we got now, 92, 94.
At least.
ASAP, or at least, yeah. I'm happy to go higher.
Go higher.
4196.
And I don't think it hurts to go higher because the idea is we're trying to capture up. And if we don't go high enough and we get scoured, like I think we're dealing with another issue. So it'll be that B notch and it'll be counterintuitive. So I think like the idea would just to.
I'll make a motion to build it up to 4196.
Second it.
Is it enough?
I don't know. It depends on the year, right? If you get a warmer winter, it might not be. But we can always go back and add to it too. That's the thing. Is like it may not be easy, but it's good.
Can I make an alternative motion? Or is that
Amend the motion.
amend the motion to knock it down to 89 and then build it up in February 1st?
What if we start getting dumped on right now?
We weren't seeing flows.
It's not, this is different because water managers have to react. So this year is entirely different. Right now, everybody's like, I think the water managers got itchy fingers for their opening their gate fingers and they're just ready to roll. Like they want to do it, but it's all based on like these next few snowstorms that we get.
So can we go both ways depending on what conditions have, based on whatever the snowfall is and what water managers are projected to do what Joe says, and then if we're trying to capture it, go.
It's gonna
all the way.
it seems really silly to go down and lower this when we're getting a 0.2 gram per liter difference. Like last time Union Pacific did this for free, and then so I think everybody knows that. If I call Union Pacific and we start having these discussions about going out there, they're gonna get sick of us. They're not gonna keep doing this for free. So if we ask them to lower it and then a week and a half later, we get a few big snowstorms and we're asking them now to donate another, 400,000 tons of rock and build this thing up. Like we just can't, I just don't see this happening that way. Like there's not a big benefit. I would say that it's like.
I'm not amending my motion.
What if we left it to 4187 and we said, let's see how this is going and what kind of inflows we get? And we just agree that when the timing is there's the best timing, whether it's February, whether it's January, let's see how the winter starts playing out. If it seems like the winter is going to turn out to be a big one, when we start getting good snowpack and water managers are releasing it, let's go build the berm up and then let's take it down in the spring.
I'm okay with that as opposed to doing it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay, because the North Arm is flatlined.
Let's do it.
It came up 1/10 of a foot. It's just flatlined. So now we're starting to see some flow in outside of evaporation season, and you're starting to see a bit of a benefit.
Let's base it off of these observations.
What I'm saying is, we can do an observations, but that's going to force us to convene and be a bit more agile, and Christine needs to do more modeling to support it, but for lack of.
We can't dilly-dally on this like we did last year, then let's
Thomas, we
put some
don't-
triggers in
Oh,
place.
it was like down to the line, Joe. We were lucky to have it in at that time. And it was honestly, it was lucky that Union Pacific was there. If it weren't for Union Pacific and it weren't for the governor's order, we would have been way too late. So I think it was unfortunate that it took us so long. So like right now, I think we should be ready just to be able to do this. And I would like to have a recommendation from the Salinity Committee to do it. I don't think we have to have that. I just think it would be nice if we had some consensus to be able to say, you know, this is probably the best way to do this. And I think that there is a way to make a motion or to have some support to be able to do this with the flexibility built in about inflow. So we could get, you know, real scientific about like what that threshold might look like, maybe based off of an inflow rate on Bear River. And once we start hitting that, we go do it or certain dates. I think there's a lot of ways we could skin this cat. But I don't want to call it a meeting right before Christmas either. And we're gonna have people that are gone. I also don't want to ask Union Pacific to go build a berm over the holidays.
Then is their ability to meet remotely.
Yeah, I think we have electronic meetings are fine, so we can do that.
So I guess I want to come back to Joe's motion amendment to the motion to add lowering the berm down to 4180. Or do you want to still want to
89.
89?
89 would be.
So I guess following our procedures, so he's made a motion to do that. Do we have a second for that motion? Or any other discussion?
I just wonder if it might, I don't know how this affects you, Joe, but it like we kind of said, you're not going to be exporting much water or salt. If there's some kind of, when you do knock it down in late spring or June, if you can just, if we could agree on that you need to knock it down a significant amount to transport any amount of mass. And if that actually will meet your needs, if you know, if there can be some kind of agreement that you will get the water at some point. I guess I'm just trying to say from a scientific perspective, to move any amount of mass, you've got to be serious about lowering that thing down.
I totally agree with you.
You're not going to get flow over 2 feet of head difference. You're not going to move a lot. So just keeping that in mind when you do if you build it up, capture it all, you're going to have to put it, you know, bring it back down substantially in order to actually have an effect that we're all talking about. And I don't know if you're going to get it with lowering it to 41.
But if it did come up, if we had 3 or 4 feet and took it down to like 4187,
yes,
I think that's where we would start to see that massive export.
So 87 would be better for me, but I don't want a sesh to knock, you know, north arm Brian back south, because there was that blip over a couple days or a week or so. So that's why I'm even okay with raising it a bit higher to prevent such a sesh that we observe.
I don't think we should make a recommendation about what level to lower it down to until we know what we got. Because I think we need to understand like what this winter brings. So if I think that the recommendation should be that we lower it based on whatever the maximum benefit to the South Arm salinity is. So that would end the maximum export. So if it means 4187, then it's 4187. And if it has to be done in sequences, like maybe you take it down 2 feet and then you take another 2 feet off to ensure that there's not, you know, these sessions or that it's going to cause any other issues, we could do that. But that would be my thought.
Okay, well, we have I guess we didn't get a second on Joe's amendment. So we have the motion on the table to raise the berm to 4196 ASAP as soon as possible. And then with the understanding that we would lower the berm significantly,
Maximize salt export or whatever.
maximize salt export come summer of 24. Did I capture that? All right, so I guess we'll vote on that then. Andrew?
Yes.
Ben is not voting. Bill Johnson?
Yes.
Craig Miller, Laura, are you or Layla? Layla, are you? Krishna was his alternate, but he's
Yeah, I don't know, or I don't think that the division has appointed a
Okay.
nominee for him.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, go for
No,
it.
no, I
Layla.
agree. I agree, Laura. I'm with you.
Okay, well, we'll consider him not here then. And we
We'll get
have,
that resolved.
all right. Carly, are you still on?
Yeah, but Bonnie's here too.
Oh, hi, Bonnie. I didn't see you. What is your vote? To raise the berm.
Oh, I guess maybe Bonnie is gone. Oh,
Yeah, I don't.
hold on one second. Come back to me.
All right, we'll come back. John left. Yes. Yes. Joe?
No.
No. Ryan?
USGS has to abstain from a direct management action like this.
All right.
Sorry.
And Thomas? Yes. And Mark?
Yes.
All right. So the motion passes.
And Carly's yes too.
Okay, thank you. All right. So the motion passes and the recommendation will be to raise the berm to 4196 as soon as we can. And I guess what I'll do when I get back today is write that up and get that back out to all of you. And then I guess Jim, Ben, what do you need from, you need a letter again, or is
I think
this?
just a simple letter would be helpful. Yeah. And I think we're gonna have to work with Eric Dixon from Water Resources to just get a good sketch up going. So it's not gonna be something that happens, next week. But there's gonna have to be some discussions with Union Pacific. So as long as we recognize that it's as soon as possible, there's gonna be a little lag here.
Okay, from the second.
All right, well, thank you. So the last thing we want to make sure we talk about is the study that was proposed that Mark talked about last month, and Tom Tripp brought up with the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council meeting I guess it's this month, it's still November. But looking at the mineral extraction impact on salinity, Mark sent me.
Let me give just a quick background for people who aren't living this day by day. That House Bill 513 was passed to revise the mineral leasing on the lake, specifically related to lithium, but also address salinity threats to Great Salt Lake. The FFSL draft rules envision a role for the salinity committee in making a decision on when they hit a salinity trigger. That salinity trigger event empowers the division to take actions like withdrawing mineral leases or curtailing production if the division finds that these actions will directly contribute to improved ecological conditions. So given that, we owe it to ourselves to be able to understand what are really the effects of mineral extraction on the lake, good and bad. And so we talk questions, and it's not, this scope is not in the form of questions, but certainly if we haven't captured something, we need to add to it. But in general, the scope is to determine the net effects of brine use by mineral extraction on earth salinity, which also includes salt removal activities, mineral returns, and a cumulative effect of year over year sequestering that salt. So salinity is the first. Second is surface elevation. Number one, from direct brine removal. And then the second bullet is really the trade-off between lower evaporation in the solar ponds when you hit higher concentrations and the artificial area added to the evaporation area when the lake level is below the level of the pond. So they offset themselves. We don't know to what degree. And then the last bullet there is just to look at a range of elevations, because there's going to be different effects and different, I guess, gyrations of that, depending on what elevation you're at. So the first really has to do with, first two are really addressing salinity and surface area effects. Number three is, how do those effects of sequestering salt in solar ponds, how are they different or better or worse or whatever else compared to what we're talking about doing with the adaptive berm, where we are sending salt to the north as if it were a solar pond. What is the difference between doing that in solar ponds and using the north arm? And then the last one is really to look at the effects of what if you requested, or I guess directed, the south arm mineral extractors to get their brine from the north arm. What happens? Good and bad across the board. And so those are the areas that, again, this is kind of my scope in thinking through this, but I would be glad to, you know, even if we don't have time to discuss it, get emails or et cetera, but we'd really like to understand. I think Tom pointed out that there's 4 billion tons of salt sequestered in solar ponds. And if that all went back into the lake, suddenly that would be really bad. So let's get the questions on paper, and let's get a third party independent modeler to put this together. So we have the answer, because this committee will be making decisions that affect, you know, companies and also people's jobs and lives. And we don't want to make a misstep in relation to that or according to the Great Salt Lake either.
So I just want to, you know, make sure that the reason that I think that it's important that we craft this question properly is because I totally understand, you know, what your question is, Mark, and what the goals are with this. And I think there's some validity and some questions that we need to answer to have a long-term salinity management plan. But I think there's some things that are a little pointed here that are in favor of like bringing this question to for the benefit of mineral extraction. So I think that the question needs to take into account what that impact is on the south arm, including the fact that did you say 4 billion tons of salt is in the south arm still? That's the floor of your pond is the south arm. So if US Magnesium packs up their bags and leaves, that the plan right now is to breach that dike, and we're going to have a disaster on our hands with how much salt would be reintroduced to the south arm.
And then I can clarify that. I think that's the purpose of that third bullet under number 1. We can clarify that because it deals with cumulative effects of sequestered salt. So there's a benefit in having that salt trapped, and there's a liability if you ever had to, the lake came up and washed it out, or if you had to artificially do it. So I can modify that to make sure that's clear. That it also includes remediation.
I think that's really important to understand that is the south arm and encompass that is in fact a risk involved with this, sequestration, because like when we talk about the north arm, that really is more of an actual sequestration because it stays in the north arm, except for when we're seeing the north arm flowing back to the south arm. But then I also think that there's an important factor here of, if we're not taking the however many acre feet of water you all take and put in your ponds and evaporate, what would happen to that otherwise? The evaporation rates versus, the concentrations of salinity, some of that's going to get moved to the north arm and end up in the north arm and precipitate out, and you're going to lose it anyway. So I think there's that this doesn't necessarily capture that very well. Like the way that Tom explained this to me was that it's more of like this direct equation, like how many tons of salt are you extracting every year? What is the cumulative impact? And then what would that do to the concentration of the south arm, over those years? And if you do it that simply, then of course it's going to look like you saved the south arm. But in reality, a lot of that would have ended up in the north arm. Evaporation would have slowed slightly because it would be deeper.
This is why
surface area.
This is why Tom and I are not doing the modeling. We need somebody independent and broad enough that they can look at all those questions and identify how much would we benefit solely related to existence or non-existence of the brine operators, or the existence or non-existence of the north arm.
And I agree. I think that's why you guys aren't doing it. That's why I'm not doing it because I can't. But I think that the reality is that we need to ask the right question to make sure that it's framed in such a way that whomever picks up this contract, they know that they need to be taking into account, not just simple equations. These are going to be pretty complex. We need to understand what would have happened had that not been taken out in the first place. There's just a lot to it. So the the advisory council, I think, needs our help to make sure we ask the question the correct way. So if they're going to fund this, they're going to want to do it only if it's supported by the Salinity Committee, is my kind of understanding, or just what I heard from the advisory council.
They formed a committee to start looking at scoping and stuff like that. So any comments that we have can help add to that.
Andrew has his hand up.
I was just gonna say that I'm very much in support of this, particularly Mark, as you point out that, I mean, what the mineral companies are doing is really functioning at some level like the berm. And so if we want to wrap our minds around this, I think this is a pretty important study to move forward.
And Ben, to your point about the threat, if there was a shutdown and the threat of an immediate release of salt, I mean, that's something that can be addressed in the salinity management plan.
Oh, yeah,
right?
totally.
Because dogum, those expectations were written, in the 70s and 80s, much different lake conditions, much different time. So that's a very controllable process. As to
It
whether-
is. I would just say that that's why I think we need to ask the right question, because we need to acknowledge that that's a risk and then talk about like that being a function of the salinity management plan. I don't know why the advisory council would want to fund a study that doesn't take into account, how this is going to benefit the lake. So the real benefit here is like, okay, there may be a benefit to extracting brines and removing that salt. I don't know if it's totally clear to me, but I'd love to understand what that is. But then
We've tried.
Yeah, well, I know you've tried, and I think we've had the same argument here in this room, like 15 times between, folks around the table here. Yeah, exactly. Tom and Thomas love this argument. So, and I love to watch them have that argument. But the reality is, we need to know, like, you're right, someone independent needs to do that. And then I think when we make the salinity management plan, it should have a contingency or a thought about like what that looks like to release it. Because right now the bond is like $400,000 for U.S. magnesium. So who's going to pay to slowly, figure out how we flush 4 billion tons of salt out? Like that's.
I'll do it for free.
Yeah,
Me and the
we're gonna
launch.
have Mark out there. Okay. Margarita.
Bill has his hand up.
So I appreciate the concern about the long-term impact of the sequestered salt in the salt arm. I wonder, Mark, given that U.S. Magnesium has a closure plan for the Superfund site that involves a salt cap on the retrofitted waste pond, which is quite large, is there the possibility of actually, addressing both in that closure plan? And I have no idea whether that's even feasible, but I think it's worth considering, and it would help me on the salinity committee to understand whether there can be a tie to the closure plan.
Good question. Yeah, right now, I think the closure plan involves putting brine on top, letting it evaporate, and then creating a salt cap. So could we do something different with the salt that's already there? And I think that's been addressed and discussed. So
mechanical placement.
Well, and that also, there's some issues that we've identified with the closure plan. If we're being completely honest, it's part of that still on sovereign lands, and inherently, if it's on sovereign lands, it could be inundated by water. And so I think there's a risk of, if we get a high water year, scouring off the cap. And so I think to me, it'd be more appropriate to condense those materials and do it upland of that. But that's probably for another day, different discussion. But yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of questions that we should be asking.
I agree.
We're coming out of time here.
Yeah.
Is it?
It's a different day, but it's the same discussion. And there is an earthen embankment around that entire retrofitted waste pond. So there really are some advantages there.
With the clay slurry wall.
I was just gonna say I think where Ben was going with this, we're really out of time. So there's not time enough for the committee to sort of refine that set of questions. But the committee could endorse a process to define a set of questions based on what's already been provided by US Mag. So I think the question is just what should the process look like moving forward? And then this committee can endorse that process, just a suggestion from a time.
And I wanted to just add, I know the gap analysis that Water Resources did identified, the need to do something like this, because the salt balance, and I think even our research plan for this committee identified the need to better understand how much brine is being moved out, how much salt is in the ponds, et cetera, how much is coming back. So I think what you're talking about here is evaluating some different scenarios, but it has to start with making sure we've got the salt balance right. And so I think that's a key first step. And then we can look, because once we get that salt balance right, then we can start to look at these scenarios of, well, what if, you know, and be able to compare.
Yeah, if we hit a trigger situation, what's the right decision to make? and What's the wrong decision?
So
So-
could we make a, like what Tim was suggesting, would it be appropriate to have a small subcommittee of folks who would be willing, maybe just the volunteers of the folks who would be interested in formulating the question? Or is that out of line to do that outside of this meeting?
No, I think that's a great idea.
The committee can endorse that. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah.
Exactly.
The committee could say,
And
yeah,
I
we're great with
think,
the subcommittee, refining the questions and working with Mark.
It makes sense to have Mark, on the committee. If Mark's willing, I assume you are. And then anybody else, I'd be willing to participate as much as I can.
Yeah, any others who want to participate? Joe, comments? Okay.
Perfect.
Good, thank you.
So I've got Mark, Ben, Joe, Thomas, and USGS.
Bill says he'd like to participate too.
All right.
Is Andrew Rupke interested? Oh,
Yes, he is.
wow. Thanks for volunteering, Andrew.
So I guess the timing, how should we, I guess I can get with you all to talk about meeting in December.
I believe yeah, that'd be great. I think we should probably just schedule a meeting. We could do a virtual too, since it's coming up on Christmas then, but I think advisory council would, Marissa, do you know when that is? January 8th, maybe?
For the next advisory
Yeah.
council, it's January 10th.
10th. So we would want to have it in advance of that, so we could give it back to the council to be able to mull over and bring that forward.
And Jeff, you can circulate what's there right now with the slides.
Additionally, like a cost breakdown would be really helpful, because we do have limited funds. So like if we're gonna try and fund any part of it with the advisory council this fiscal year, like it's a set amount. So it kind of, we'll need to know numbers.
Yeah, and I think obviously you won't have to know how much it is. I think just some ideas.
Yeah.
And then we will have to work within what's available and say like, this is the amount that we can go up to when we bid it out. So we can do that. Okay. So.
Great. I'll get the notes out here to you all by next week, early next week. I'll just forward your document to the whole committee, and then get a doodle pull out to schedule that meeting for the subcommittee, and then they'll provide recommendations to the advisory council. So I think in terms of other action items, is I'll summarize the motion today to raise the berm and get that over to Ben and Jim, and then copy everybody else on that as well. And then I think our next scheduled meeting for the Salinity committee would be, falls on the January 25th. Just following our
It is a Thursday.
Thursday morning.
Same time.
Yep, so 10 o'clock on Thursday, January 25th is the next scheduled meeting. So, all right, anything else? If not, we can adjourn.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Jeff.